I had already merged onto the interstate when I realized my work laptop was still sitting on the dining room table. I actually laughed at myself. I was only 20 minutes from home, headed to a weekend training conference, and I figured I'd run back before my husband, Jason, even noticed I was gone. When I pulled into the driveway, his truck was still there. I grabbed my spare key, unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, and stepped inside, expecting to yell, "Forgot something." Instead, I heard his voice coming from the kitchen. He wasn't talking to our daughter. He wasn't on a work call. He was on speaker with someone, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. Then he said, "She's finally gone for the weekend. We can stop pretending and start figuring out what comes next." I froze with one hand still on the doorknob. A woman's voice answered, soft enough that I couldn't make out every word, but I heard my husband's reply perfectly. "No, she has no idea. Emily still thinks we're okay." My laptop was sitting exactly where I'd left it, just a few feet away. But in that moment, I couldn't move toward it. Because everything I believed about my marriage had just changed before I even made it out of town. My name is Emily. I'm 29, and until that Friday afternoon, I would have told anyone I had a normal life. Jason and I had been married for 6 years and lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. We weren't rich. We weren't the couple posting perfect vacation pictures every weekend. We were just steady. I worked as an HR coordinator for a healthcare company, and Jason managed operations for a local warehouse. Our 8-year-old daughter, Lily, kept us busy with soccer practice, spelling tests, and an endless collection of art projects that somehow covered every surface in our house. Life was loud, predictable, and sometimes exhausting, but I thought that was what marriage looked like after a few years. Looking back, I can see the little changes I ignored. Jason smiling at his phone before turning the screen over. Staying late at work more often. Saying he was tired whenever I suggested a date night. None of those things felt big enough to accuse someone over. I kept telling myself every couple goes through seasons. You don't throw away a family because your husband seems distracted for a few months. I believed that right up until I quietly walked back into my own house, heard his voice carrying through the kitchen, and realized I had just become a stranger listening in on someone else's marriage. I backed out of the house without making a sound, my laptop still sitting on the dining room table exactly where I'd left it. I couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting into my car. I drove to a grocery store parking lot a few miles away because it was the first place I recognized, parked near the edge where almost nobody was around, and just stared through the windshield. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. It was Jason. "Hey, babe. Everything okay? You forgot to text me when you got on the road." I looked at his name on the screen and felt sick. 20 minutes earlier I'd heard him telling another woman that I had no idea, and now he sounded like the same husband who always reminded me to drive safely. I answered anyway. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just stopped for coffee." "Good," he said. "Drive carefully. Love you." Those 3 words hit differently than they ever had before. After we hung up, I called my manager and lied, saying my daughter wasn't feeling well and I couldn't make the conference. She told me not to worry and said we'd catch me up next week. Then I called my younger sister, Megan. She answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" she asked. I hadn't even said hello before I started crying. 45 minutes later, I was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea I never touched, telling her exactly what I'd heard. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked one question. "Did you actually hear him say he was having an affair?" I shook my head. "No. But he said I was gone for the weekend. He said we could stop pretending. He said I had no idea." Megan nodded slowly. "Then don't confront him yet." I frowned. "Why not?" "Because right now you have pieces, not the whole picture. If you walk in angry, he'll explain everything away, and you'll spend the next year wondering if you imagined it." Wait until you know exactly what's happening. I hated that she was right. The rest of that afternoon felt unreal. Jason texted me a picture of Lily after he'd picked her up from school. She was holding a drawing she'd made in art class with the biggest smile on her face. He wrote, "She wants to FaceTime you tonight before bed." I stared at the picture for almost a minute before replying with a simple heart emoji. That evening I stayed at Megan's house. Lily called around 8. She proudly showed me her drawing of our family standing in front of our house, all three of us holding hands. "Daddy made grilled cheese," she said. "He burned one side again." Jason laughed somewhere in the background. "Hey, that's one time." I smiled because Lily expected me to smile, but the sound of his voice made my chest tighten. After she went to bed, Jason called. "Conference hotel nice?" he asked casually. "Yeah, I lied. Long day already. Miss you." There was a pause. "Miss you too," I answered, though the words felt borrowed from someone else's life. After we hung up, I barely slept. I kept replaying that moment at the front door, wondering if I'd misunderstood, wondering if there was some explanation that would make everything make sense again. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same sentence. She's finally gone for the weekend. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to accuse him based on half a conversation. I was going to pay attention. For the first time in months, I stopped making excuses for the little things I'd ignored. And once I started looking, I realized there were far more secrets hiding inside our ordinary life than I'd ever wanted to believe. I went home Sunday afternoon like nothing had happened. Jason met me at the front door, wrapped his arms around me, and kissed my forehead the same way he always did after I came back from a work trip. "How was the conference?" he asked as he carried my overnight bag inside. I looked him straight in the eyes and answered, "Long, but productive." The lie came easier than I expected, and that scared me. Lily came running down the hallway and nearly knocked me over with a hug. "Mom. Dad let me eat pancakes for dinner yesterday." I laughed and hugged her tighter than usual. For the rest of the evening, we looked exactly like the family everyone thought we were. We ate dinner together, helped Lily finish her math homework, watched half a movie on the couch, and argued playfully over whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. If someone had looked through our front window, they would have seen a happy family. They never would have guessed I was watching every move my husband made. Monday morning, Jason left for work 15 minutes earlier than normal. As soon as he pulled out of the driveway, I opened our shared phone bill online. We'd always shared passwords because neither of us had anything to hide, or at least I thought so. One number appeared over and over, sometimes late at night, sometimes during lunch, sometimes for just a few minutes, other times nearly an hour. It wasn't saved in his contacts, but I wrote it down anyway. My heart raced as I searched the number online. Nothing. No business listing. No name. Just a cell phone. I almost called it myself, but I stopped. If someone answered, what would I even say? Instead, I saved the number and closed the browser before I could talk myself into doing something reckless. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from soccer practice. As we drove home, she looked out the window and asked, "Mom, are you and Dad mad at each other?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "You both smile, but it doesn't look real anymore. Kids notice everything. Even the things we think we're hiding." That night, after Lily went to bed, Jason sat beside me on the couch scrolling through his phone. Every few minutes, the screen lit up. He smiled once, then quickly locked it when he realized I was looking. "Work?" I asked. "Yeah," he answered without hesitation. "Warehouse issue." I nodded and picked up my book, pretending to read the same page over and over. Around 10:30, he said he needed to take a quick call because one of the night supervisors had a problem. Instead of walking into his office, he stepped onto the back patio and quietly closed the sliding door behind him. Through the glass, I watched him pacing slowly across the deck. His shoulders relaxed. He laughed. Then he looked toward the house before turning his back to the window. He stayed outside almost 20 minutes. When he came back in, I was still sitting in the same position. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. False alarm. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head before heading upstairs. The next afternoon, while I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. "Hello?" There was silence for a second before a woman spoke. "Hi, is this Emily?" My stomach dropped. "Yes." She took a shaky breath. "You don't know me." "My name is Nicole." I think we need to talk about your husband." Before I could answer, she added one sentence that made every hair on my arms stand up. "I'm not the woman you think you was talking to, and if you don't hear me out, you're going to blame the wrong person." I couldn't speak for a few seconds. I walked into the laundry room and quietly shut the door so Lily wouldn't hear anything if she came downstairs. "Who are you?" I finally asked. The woman sounded nervous, like she'd rehearsed the conversation 100 times. "My name is Nicole. I'm divorced, I have a 10-year-old son, and I work at the accounting firm that handles your husband's company's payroll." That wasn't what I expected. "Then why were you calling Jason?" I asked. She sighed. "I wasn't. He was calling me because of my sister." My heart skipped. "Your sister?" "Her name is Vanessa." The name meant nothing to me. Nicole continued before I could interrupt. "Vanessa met Jason about 5 months ago through a business event. She told us he was separated. She said the divorce wasn't final because you two were trying to make things easy for your daughter." I closed my eyes. "We're not separated." "I know that now," Nicole said quietly. "I found your social media yesterday. Family pictures. Birthday party. Vacation photos from this spring. That's why I'm calling." I leaned against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. "Why would you help me?" There was a long pause. "Because I was cheated on by my ex-husband. Someone knew the truth and never told me. I promised myself I'd never let another woman stay in the dark if I could stop it." I believed her before she even finished the sentence. There was something in her voice that didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded tired. Honest. She told me Vanessa had ended things with Jason the night before after Nicole showed her my Facebook page. Vanessa had been furious. She'd confronted Jason, who admitted he was still living with his wife but claimed the marriage had been over for years. Nicole said Vanessa walked away immediately. "She doesn't want him," Nicole said. "She never wanted to be part of someone else's marriage." I thanked her for telling me, and before hanging up, she quietly said, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this." I sat on the floor for almost 10 minutes after the call ended. Suddenly, the conversation I'd overheard made sense. The woman on speaker hadn't been Rachel or some old girlfriend. It had been Vanessa. But that didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it hurt more. Jason hadn't been pulled back into a past relationship. He had chosen to build a completely new one while coming home to us every night. That evening, he walked through the front door carrying takeout from my favorite Mexican restaurant. "Thought I'd give you a break from cooking," he said with an easy smile. Lily cheered when she saw the bags. I watched him setting food on the table, laughing with our daughter, asking about her spelling test, acting like the same dependable husband he'd always been. It was almost impossible to connect this version of Jason with the man who had lied to another woman about being separated. During dinner, Lily talked nonstop about an upcoming school play. Jason promised he'd be in the front row. I caught myself wondering how many promises he'd made lately that he never intended to keep. After Lily went upstairs to shower, Jason started loading the dishwasher. "You okay?" he asked without looking at me. "You've seemed quiet since you got back." I dried my hands on a towel. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you happy?" He stopped for a second before placing another plate into the dishwasher. Of course I am. Really? He finally looked at me. Where's this coming from? I held his gaze just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Just wondering. He forced a smile. We've had a good life, Emily. Good life. Not happy marriage. Not I love you. Just, good life. That answer stayed with me long after he went to bed. Around midnight, I opened the folder where we kept copies of our bank statements and credit card bills. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for the truth. And within 15 minutes, I found a hotel charge from 3 weeks earlier on a Wednesday afternoon. Jason had told me he was at an all-day leadership workshop. The hotel was less than 20 minutes from his office. I wrote the date down beside the phone number and closed the folder. I wasn't guessing anymore. The pieces were starting to fit together. And I knew the next conversation we had would change our family forever. I didn't confront Jason that night. I wanted one thing before I said a word. I wanted him to have the chance to tell the truth on his own. The next Friday, after Lily left for a sleepover at my parents' house, the house was unusually quiet. Jason grilled burgers on the back patio while I set the table inside. It looked like any other Friday evening. We ate, cleaned the kitchen together, and settled into the living room. Around 9, I muted the television and turned toward him. Can we talk? He looked surprised but nodded. Sure. I folded my hands together to stop them from shaking. I'm going to ask you something once. I already know the answer, so please don't make this worse by lying. His expression changed immediately. Emily, what are you talking about? I took a slow breath. Are you having an affair? The room went completely still. He looked at the floor, then back at me. No. It came out too fast. Too automatic. I reached into the drawer beside the couch and placed a sheet of paper on the coffee table. It was the hotel receipt I'd printed. Then another page with the repeated phone number highlighted. Finally, I quietly said, and I know who Nicole is. The color drained from his face. He leaned back like someone had knocked the air out of him. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he covered his face with both hands. How long have you known? He whispered. Since the day I forgot my laptop. His hands slowly dropped. You came back? I nodded. I heard enough. Tears filled his eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were for me or for himself. It started 5 months ago, he admitted. I met Vanessa through work. At first it was just talking. I felt stuck, like every day was the same. She listened. She made me feel interesting again. I stared at him, unable to believe how ordinary his explanation sounded. So instead of talking to your wife, you created another life. He looked down. I told myself I'd end it. Every week I said it would be the last time. I let out a quiet laugh that didn't sound like laughter. You also told another woman you were separated. His eyes widened. How do you know that? Because her sister had more respect for our marriage than you did. He didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to say. After several minutes, he finally whispered, I'm sorry. I looked around our living room. Lily's backpack was by the stairs. A family picture from our beach vacation sat on the bookshelf. Our daughter's science project was still taped to the refrigerator. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing was. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked. He slowly shook his head. You looked me in the eyes every single day and made me believe I was imagining the distance between us. I questioned myself because I trusted you. He started crying openly then, but I felt strangely calm. The panic I'd lived with for months disappeared the moment the truth was finally sitting between us. I'm staying with my parents for a while, I said. Tomorrow I'll come back for some clothes, and then we'll figure out how to tell Lily together. She deserves honesty from at least one of us. He stood as if he wanted to stop me, but he didn't move. he knew he had lost that right. I packed one suitcase that night while he sat alone downstairs. Before leaving, I walked into Lily's room. Her nightlight cast a soft glow over the walls covered with drawings and soccer ribbons. I gently touched the blanket on her bed and made myself a promise. No matter what happened between Jason and me, she would never feel responsible for our choices. 6 months later, the divorce papers were signed. It wasn't easy. There were hard conversations, counseling sessions for Lily, holidays that felt different, and plenty of tears. But there was also peace. Jason eventually admitted that the affair had never been about finding a better partner. It had been about escaping conversations he didn't want to have. By the time he was ready to face those conversations, he'd already destroyed the trust our marriage was built on. Today, Lily is doing well, and so am I. Our home is smaller now, but it's honest. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that the truth may break your heart for a season, but living inside someone else's lie can steal years from your life. When I think back to that Friday, I don't remember forgetting my laptop. I remember standing just inside my own front door, hearing my husband speak like I was already gone. For a long time, I wondered if I should have walked in sooner, interrupted the call, or confronted him before the lies grew bigger. But the truth is, hearing those few minutes changed everything. It gave me clarity I probably never would have gotten from another late-night argument or another promise that things would get better. Losing my marriage wasn't the future I imagined, but losing myself while pretending everything was fine would have been even worse. Today, Jason and I co-parent respectfully. Lily knows she's loved by both of us, and our home is built on honesty instead of appearances. Healing didn't happen overnight, and some days are still harder than others, but I no longer spend my evenings wondering where my husband is or whether I'm imagining the distance between us. That chapter is over. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, or if you've ever ignored your own instincts because you wanted to believe everything was okay, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and if you enjoy real-life emotional stories like this one, subscribe and join us for the next chapter.